Welcome to Lesson 3 in the Luke 10 course, which we're calling Leader 101. Just a quick review. In Lesson 1, we talked about the idea that in the New Testament, church equals family. Every church that is mentioned in the Bible met in a home and functioned like a small spiritual family. This was the understanding in the New Testament of what church was all about. That leads us to Lesson 2, and in Lesson 2 we suggest that leaders equal parents, spiritual parents in the best sense of the word. I know that kind of creates tension for a lot of people. Some of us have had better or worse experiences with our own parents, but nonetheless that's the biblical idea. We see Paul reflecting that in 1 Thessalonians 2, where he says to the Thessalonians, we were like a mother to you, we were like a father to you. The biblical understanding or paradigm of leadership often is that of a spiritual parent. Now in Lesson 3, we want to expand on this idea of what do spiritual mothers and fathers look like. And I'm going to use the phrase spiritual moms and dads are elders. Now, the word elder in the Greek is the word presbyteros, and it originally means literally an older one. Might refer to someone whose children are grown, and they're probably going to be in their 50s or maybe their 60s. That's the original meaning. And some of you will feel like that we ought to continue with that. For me, I think it speaks more of maturity. I know some 60-year-olds that are not very mature at all. I know some 20-year-olds that are really quite mature. And so there's some flexibility. We can have a discussion about whether we want to apply that word elder to someone who's in their 20s or 30s. I like to say, just keep in mind that Jesus, when he started his ministry, was probably 30 or early 30s. And would we say that he's an elder or not? I think probably so. Regardless of that, the critical idea is that spiritual moms and dads are spiritual and emotional grown-ups. In order to understand what that means, I want to share with you a theory that I have. I've never heard anybody else articulate this, and you can see if you think it has validity or not. Now, first of all, I want to do this in the context of Paul's life. We know that Paul became a Christian in the mid-30s. That's Acts 9, the road to Damascus, and all of that. About 10 years later, mid-40s, maybe late 40s, Paul begins to get involved in ministry, at least as far as we know about it. This is where Barnabas goes and gets him, and they begin on these missionary journeys. But what are they doing in these missionary journeys? Well, I believe at some point Barnabas or some of the others explained to Paul Jesus' teaching in Luke 10. That Jesus' primary strategy for the fulfillment of the Great Commission was planting churches, planting vibrant families of Jesus, bases of operation in every neighborhood that could expand like a benevolent virus. That was the strategy. When you go into a town or village, find the house of peace. There's a man of peace or a woman of peace living there. That's the place that you are to impart the virus of the kingdom. Eat what is set before you. Share the kingdom. Demonstrate, heal the sick, cast out demons, and all those kinds of things. Plant a church there, much like what Peter did with Cornelius in Acts 10. So I believe that's what Paul learned from Barnabas and maybe from some of the others, and that's what he was engaged with. And so fast forward now to the early 60s AD. Paul has been involved with planting churches for about 15 years at this point, and he's writing letters to two of his spiritual sons. Here's this idea of family again. Timothy as a son and Titus as a son. And he's given them various instructions about ministry. And in both 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1, there's some amazing list of qualifications there, descriptions. And what is he describing? Well, he's describing elders and overseers. And what we know is that these two terms are actually referring to the same person. An elder, when he uses the word elder, he's talking about a person in regard to their character, their maturity. When he uses the word overseer, he's talking about a person with reference to their function, overseeing. We're going to unpack that word in Lesson 4. Right now we're talking about elder, or one who is mature. So he's making this list. Here's my theory, that Paul is reflecting on 15 years of church planting, of starting house churches. And if he's like any of us, most of us, no doubt he had some great successes, put those in one column perhaps, places where he found a house of peace, a person of peace, and he started a church and it thrived. It was healthy. People grew in their faith. The church multiplied. All kinds of things happened as a result of what happened in that particular house of peace. But then there's probably another list, probably other places where Paul thought he had a person of peace, a house of peace, started a church there, but it struggled. It wasn't very healthy. There was conflict. There was division, and maybe over time the church actually dissolved. And I think, this is my theory, that Paul was reflecting on his experience. He was thinking about why was it that some of those house churches really succeeded and others really did not. And I suspect that he knew what we know, and that is that in any physical family, it's going to be about as healthy, the family is going to be about as healthy as the leaders, the moms and dads of that particular family. And the same is true spiritually. Any house church is going to be about as healthy as the spiritual mom, spiritual dad leading those house churches. That's the critical thing. And what he's doing is he's reflecting on why was it that some of these house churches really were healthy and some were not. And he's describing, I think there, an elder, yes, an overseer, yes. I think he's also describing a person of peace. How do you know if you have one? Here's why I think that. If we look at these lists and if we take any quality out of this list, we see what happens. So for instance, let's imagine that you have a house church, and here you found somebody who looks like a person of peace. Maybe they really know Scripture well, they're a great teacher, they have a great capacity to gather people together, and this house church is really going, all kinds of good things are happening, but it turns out that this person is an alcoholic. Paul says in this list, addicted to wine. What do you imagine is going to happen with that house church eventually? Well, you can just picture all the difficulties that are going to happen when you have an alcoholic who's leading the house church. Or pick another word. Another word that's used is the word contentious. An elder is not contentious. Another English translation of that same word uses the word pugnacious. I like that, very descriptive. Pugnacious. It means a person who's always fighting, who's always getting into arguments with people. There's always division that seems to happen, and not unity. Again, if you plant a church with that kind of person as the leader, you can imagine that the house church is not going to be very successful. It's going to really struggle. And so, my theory is that Paul is describing really people of peace, and how do you know if you have one? You can look at these lists and see. I want to make a couple of comments about these lists, because part of your assignment this week is going to be to read through these two lists. Again, read until the Spirit stops you. A couple of comments. First of all, it's easy to look at these lists and assume that they are describing some kind of super Christian, super spiritual person, and I don't think that's true. I think these are just basic spiritual descriptors of people. Not perfect people, not like any of us have totally arrived in all of these, but we've made progress on them. They're the basic tenor of life. And so I don't want you to be too intimidated by these lists. And if they were describing perfect people, we have no house church leaders. So that's the first thing. Secondly, these lists are rich. I encourage you to take time on some of these different words to kind of unpack them and see what's there. Get your concordance out. Get your commentary out. If you have a friend who has some capacity with the Greek, even better. Let me give you an example. In both lists, it says an elder and overseer is blameless. And that word can be kind of intimidating. You know, who among us is blameless? You know, we've never sinned. We've never made a mistake. We've never. Well, again, we'd have no house church leaders. But if we dig underneath and find the Greek word that Paul is using, it's a tremendous word. It's a compound Greek word. 3 parts to it. The first part, the root word, is kaleo, to call. And then in front of that is the prefix en, hen, and that means to call in. And in Greek, the understanding is that this is where someone has a charge against you. and they call you in and say, let's talk about this. Someone has been offended, somebody has been hurt, and they come to you and they want to talk about it. The next part of this word is another prefix, the letters an, which negates it. And so it means someone of whom it is true that that never has a person come to you with a complaint and it's not been dealt with. So it means that a mark of maturity is that we know how, and we actually work this out, to deal with people who have offenses. I mean, that's just a given in leadership, right? Somebody said to lead is to be misunderstood. There's always going to be somebody who's going to be upset by something you do. Sometimes it's going to be legitimate, sometimes it's not going to be. But that you are experienced and you know how to deal with people when they have an offense. That's what the word blameless means. Not perfect, but that of the people that have had an offense, we have dealt with it in a godly way. So each of these words are really worth looking at, studying, unpacking, talking about. Hope you have a great time with those. Third thing is I want to encourage you again to read until the Spirit stops you. I think the Spirit's going to affirm you on some of these. He loves hospitality, able to teach. And other times the Spirit's going to say, now this one over here, this is one you need to work on and you need to grow in. And you'll have a great conversation about that. So, lesson 3 is this idea that spiritual moms and dads are elders, or if you're uncomfortable with that for younger folks, they are spiritual and emotional grown-ups. Not perfect, but they've made progress. They've grown. How do you know if you've made enough progress? I think that's something you process with the Lord, and you also process with your house church and people around you to know whether at this point in life there is enough maturity that you're able to be an effective spiritual mom and dad. So lesson 3, really important in this whole process of understanding what exactly are spiritual moms and dads. Hope you have a great time interacting first of all with the Spirit, with the coach, and then with people in your cohort, with your CO2 about this material. Have a great time with that.